A legit NBA draft prospect who went to high school with Caleb Battle, was recruited by RJ Barsh, and was teammates with Jalen Warley, just entered the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, we're going to discuss a mid-major transfer from Missouri State who the Zags have contacted. Spoiler alert, he's a shooting guard who has a very high percentage from three. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the movement via the transfer portal out of the WCC. 9 players have transferred to the Power Conference level, just one from a Power Conference school to a WCC school so far. But we're going to get to all of that to close out the show. But first, we have to start talking about Jamir Watkins. Jamir Watkins is a 6'7" wing from Trenton, New Jersey, who hit the transfer portal after 2 seasons at Florida State. Previously spent 2 seasons at VCU, but one of them was the COVID year, so he has an extra year of eligibility. Watkins initially played at Trenton Catholic High School, the same high school as Caleb Battle, and since both of them are older prospects, I believe they overlapped at Trenton High School. At least they should have theoretically overlapped at Trenton High School. Obviously, Battle not currently on Gonzaga's roster, but you got to think that it helps if those two guys know each other. We'll get into some more of the connections between Watkins and Gonzaga in a second, but Watkins began his college basketball career at VCU, the VCU Rams out of the A-10 conference. This was during the 2020-21 season, which was the COVID season, meaning that this year of basketball does not count against him eligibility-wise. Watkins played 26 games with the Rams as a freshman, started 2 of them, played about 18 and a half minutes per game, but averaged 7 points in just 18 and a half minutes. He then sat out the next season, the 21-22 season, returned for VCU in the 22-23 season, and saw his playing time tick up. He went from about 18 minutes per game to about 23 and a half minutes per game, started 17 of VCU's 35 games that year. Performance ticked up, averaged 9.5 points, 5.5 boards, shot 34% from 3. And then he hit the transfer portal and ended up landing at Florida State for Coach Leonard Hamilton in the ACC. In his first season at Florida State, this was back in 23-24, so not last season, but the season prior to that, he started all 33 games for the Seminoles, played about 28 minutes per game, put up some of the best numbers of his career, 15 and a half points per game, 6 rebounds, a little under 3 assists, a little under 2 steals per game, was very efficient as well, 50% on 2-point attempts, 7.6 attempts per game. So he's taken a lot of shots, converting at a high clip, especially for a guard. Again, he's 6'7", so he's a bigger guard, more of a 3 wing type player, but still a very efficient 50%. On those 2-point attempts, he was 34.5% from 3 on just under 3 attempts per game. So not great as a 3-point shooter that season, but also not terrible as a 3-point shooter. He also shot 79.5% from the free throw line on over 6 attempts per game from the stripe. So like his buddy Battle from Trenton Catholic High School, he likes to get to the line, likes to draw contact. Not quite as efficient of a free throw shooter as Battle, but 80% or just under 80%. That's a pretty good mark if you're getting the line over 6 times per game. After this very successful season at Florida State for the Noles, Watkins entered the transfer portal, ultimately stayed in the NBA draft process as well. I think there was like 9 or 10 guys from Florida State that entered the portal. It looked like a massive rebuilding offseason for Florida State. Watkins stayed in the draft process until the very end, opted to return to school, and at that time also took himself out of the transfer portal and returned to Florida State. It was a huge coup for Coach Hamilton and the Noles to get him back for his senior season, and it paid off handsomely for Florida State and for Watkins. I say for Florida State, they weren't particularly good this year. They didn't, break through and make it back to the NCAA tournament or anything like that, but it worked out in the sense that they got their best player back, and he played like their best player. Watkins had a tremendous season last year for the Noles. 32 games, started every single one of them, played about 31 minutes a night. He averaged a career high 18.4 points per game in the ACC, 5.7 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 1.2 steals per game. Basically the same efficiency on two-pointers. He was 50%. As a junior, he was 49.6%. That's a rounding error. As a senior on two-pointers, also took about 8 of them per game. The three-point shot dropped a bit. He was 34.4%. As a junior, he was 32.1% this most recent season, but he did tick up his volume. He was just under 3 attempts per game as a junior. He attempted a little more than 5 threes per game last year. I suspect that some of the feedback Watkins received in the draft process was to be a more consistent three-point shooter. So he beefed up his volume. He took more threes. Unfortunately, the actual percentage did not increase. And while I've been saying on the show quite a bit, I think that volume matters more than percent. The fact that he went from 3 attempts to 5 attempts per game and his percentage lowered in the same offensive system is probably not a great sign for Watkins going forward. Although, as we've talked about before, sometimes Gonzaga's offense tends to open up those guys who were better three-point shooters previously, which Watkins was. He also shot 75% from the free throw line on, at this time, 7.7 free throw attempts per game. He led the ACC in free throws made and free throws attempted last year, 193 free throws made. That is a staggering number. Jamir Watkins was elite at getting to the free throw line. And 75%, it's not elite in the way that Caleb Battle certainly was, as over 90%. But if you're going to get to the line nearly 8 times a game, I'm content with you shooting 75%. That's a darn good mark. And 6 free points per game, effectively, the way that he played for Florida State last year. He was all ACC performer, his 4th in the ACC in points per game. Really strong season for him. He enters the transfer portal on Wednesday. He entered the portal with a DNC, which means a do not contact tag. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. A lot of players are entering the portal with that tag, and still, it's kind of just, it doesn't mean much. Let's put it that way. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. And so we don't have a list of schools that have contacted Watkins that are interested in Watkins. We don't have any visits or anything at the time of this recording. Obviously, things move very fast in this month-long transfer portal window. So we'll see if that changes by the time you're even listening to this show. But for right now, instead of talking about other teams that are interested in Watkins, because there could be a whole huge list of teams, I want to talk about those connections that he has with Gonzaga, because we've mentioned the Caleb Battle high school connection a handful of times. And while it's not nothing, it's probably the least symbolic in terms of actually potentially helping Jamir Watkins decide to come to Spokane. He was also teammates with Jalen Warley, who of course is at Gonzaga, set to play his final season of college basketball and his first with the Zags. After last year, he transferred to Virginia, was set to play for Virginia last year. Tony Bennett retired. He said, I don't really want to deal with this, hit the portal, came to Gonzaga, redshirted for the season. But his season prior to that was with Jamir Watkins at Florida State. So Jalen Warley and Jamir Watkins are friends. They've played together. They're connected. They know each other. That's obviously a huge advantage for Gonzaga in terms of having somebody who can speak to the program. Obviously, Warley has not played in games yet, but can certainly say, hey, this is the vibe. This is the culture. This is what they're telling me. This is, why I'm excited to be here type thing. And also, I think perhaps the most notable connection, RJ Barsh, who's Gonzaga's assistant head coach, one of their assistant coaches, who's been kind of one of their primary recruiters through the last couple of years. He was at Florida State, and he helped recruit Jamir Watkins to Florida State. So we know that the Barsh connection helped land Warley in Spokane, and now could it potentially help land Jamir Watkins? Because being able to say, hey, we got one of your coaches, he's selling the program, he's telling you why this makes sense. We got one of your former teammates, he's selling the program, he's telling you why it makes sense. Guy you went to high school with, just transferred here from a power conference program, had an up and down season, but ultimately I think Caleb Battle felt loved and appreciated and respected here in Spokane at Gonzaga. And I think that messaging would be what is passed along to Jamir Watkins. So when you're hearing that from multiple people that, ideally you trust and love and respect, that's going to go a long way. That's going to go a significant way towards being able to recruit him. Obviously, there are other factors. Money's going to be a huge factor. And there are teams that have a whole bunch of money that are going to be willing to spend it on Jamir Watkins. We've seen some staggering numbers. I never really trust the NIL numbers around players because there's no reporting. There's nothing that says you can't just make up numbers effectively. There's no contracts, there's no actual reporting. But if some of the numbers are accurate, then somebody's probably going to drop a huge bag, $1 million plus $2 million bag on Jamir Watkins. If that does happen, Gonzaga, I don't know if they're going to do that. I don't know if I think they have it in totality, but I don't think they're going to commit all of it to one player. I think that would be a silly thing for them to do. So if Jamir Watkins says you need to pay me X amount and Gonzaga's not willing or able to do that, then this whole thing falls apart. And it's possible that happens. I don't know all of Jamir Watkins' motivations from entering the transfer portal, less than 24 hours ago as I'm recording this, but we know the connections to Gonzaga. We also know the fit at Gonzaga is there. They need a 3. We know Jalen Warley and Jamir Watkins can play together, so there's no concern about that. We know that Jamir Watkins is an elite free throw shooter. We know that he's an elite at putting pressure on the rim, at bending the defense. We know he's an excellent finisher around the rim. We know he's a decent three-point shooter. A lot of that applied to Caleb Battle. Watkins is bigger, and he has been proven to be a more consistent player than Caleb Battle. So you're basically getting a supercharged jumbo version of Caleb Battle with a bit more scoring touch, a little bit less overall consistency at the free throw line, but better in most other ways to Battle. That's not a knock on Battle. Jamir Watkins is just really, really good. So the fit is there. He would probably slot in at the 3. He would probably be Gonzaga's second leading scorer if Graham Ike came back, maybe their first leading scorer if it was just him and Huff. Kind of being the top 2 guys. The fit is there. The fit is there. The fit is there for Watkins in terms of being a player who wants to continue to boost his NBA draft stock. Players have transferred to Gonzaga and gone on to the NBA before. Andrew Nembhard did it. Brandon Clark did it. Nigel Williams-Goss got a sniff at the NBA. Dan Dickau, going all the way back. This is not an uncommon thing. And Watkins in a more spaced out NBA-style offense where he can create, where he can shoot threes, where he can kind of showcase more of his skills than he was able to do at Florida State, might be a marriage that works really well for both sides. So this is absolutely, unquestionably, one of the best players in the transfer portal that Gonzaga fans need to be keeping an eye on, because this could be a serious game changer for the program if they're able to convince him to come out to Spokane, follow his buddy Jalen Warley. Well, Gonzaga also contacted a sharpshooting guard from the mid-major ranks. We're going to talk about Missouri State's Vincent Brady II coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can just focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. So get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking transfer portal targets. For Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs, we talked Jamir Watkins from Florida State, who's old teammates with Caleb Battle, old teammates with Jalen Warley, was recruited by R.J. Barsh while he was at Florida State. So certainly a lot of connections to the Gonzaga program. And now we're going to talk about a transfer that we know Gonzaga has reached out to. Player doesn't have nearly as many connections to Spokane or the area, but it's notable that the Zags have reached out, and we're going to talk about why in just a second. That would be Missouri State transfer guard Vincent Brady. Brady's a 6'4" senior guard from Indianapolis. He played high school ball in Indianapolis and also played at the Air Force Prep in Colorado. He began his his college career at IUPUI. Yes, I know it's now called IU Indy, but while he was there, it was called IUPUI, and that's what we're going to call it because I like that name, and I'm sad that they changed it. That's out in the Horizon League. He played there as a freshman and as a sophomore. His freshman year, he started 31 out of 32 games, played 32 minutes a game, so was right away, instantly a key contributor for this program. Averaged 11 points, 4 boards, just under 2 assists per game. Was efficient, 59% on his two-pointers, 35% from 3. That was on over 5 attempts per game. And then as a sophomore, he weirdly regressed, like a lot. He still averaged 9 points per game. So he went from 11 points per game as a freshman to 9 points as a sophomore. But his three-point shooting plummeted. Like we're talking Michael Ajayi, Ben Gregg levels of plummeting. And I'm sorry those guys are going to catch us stray, but it's worth it to emphasize the point here. He shot 34.7% as a freshman on 5.2 attempts per game. As a sophomore on 4.2 attempts per game, Brady shot 21.5%. That is a sharp decline, a sharp decline as a three-point shooter. The rest of his numbers dipped a little bit as well. And after the season, he hits the transfer portal. He ends up landing at Missouri State in the Missouri Valley Conference, a very quality conference, a program that hasn't had a ton of success, but is in a league that has had plenty of success. And as a junior this past season, his first year with Missouri State, he played 30 games, started all of them, and played about 32 minutes per game. And he had the best numbers of his career. 13.5 points per game, 4.3 boards, 2.5 assists, a little over 1 steal per game, just over 50% on 2-point attempts. That was about 5 of them per game. And then the kicker, the key, the three-point shooting came roaring back. 35% as a freshman, 21.5% as a sophomore, but as a junior on a better team in a better conference against better competition, he went out and shot 38% on 4.3 attempts per game. He was also 76.5% from the free throw line on about 5 attempts per game. I bring that up because he's not just a three-point shooter the way Brendan Howson, who we spoke about on Thursday's show, is like just a catch and shoot three-point guy. He doesn't do much else. Brady got to the line about 5 times per game at Missouri State. That's pretty clear indication that he's not just catch and shoot. He's also driving to the basket. He converted over 50% of the time on his 2-point attempts. Like there's more to his game than just the three-point shooting, but gosh, it was nice to see that shooting tick up so significantly from where he was his final season at UEPUE. He had some big games as well, 27 points, 10 boards, and a pair of steals, 13 of 14 from the free throw line. That was against High Point. He also had 29 points, 8 boards, and a pair of steals on 9 of 11 shooting on 2-point attempts. That was a road game against Bradley. Bradley's a very good team in the Missouri Valley Conference. In fact, San Francisco went out and lost a road game to Bradley this year, and I think that was a quad 1 loss for the Dons. So for Brady here to put up 29 and 8 against that team on the road is a very promising sign of what he can do against high-level competition. Per Jamie Shaw of On3, here's the list of teams that have reached out to Vincent Brady, and this is one of the strangest lists that I think I have seen in this, as somebody who reads these lists 15, 20 times per day looking for Gonzaga's name. I was surprised by this list. Gonzaga, Kansas, George Washington, Rhode Island, Temple, Charlotte, Marshall, New Mexico, UNLV, and High Point, who he is visiting. He has set a visit to High Point on April 13th. Again, that's a team he dropped 27 on last year. Now, High Point was coached by Alan Huss. They had a really successful season, actually picked up AP votes as a top 25 team this year. However, I don't know when the tweet that said he's visiting High Point went out necessarily, but I do know that Coach Alan Huss has left High Point to take the associate head coaching job and coach in waiting job at Creighton behind Greg McDermott. I believe that happened after the announcement that Brady was going to visit High Point. So I suspect there's a chance that visit may not be happening anymore. Regardless, this is a list that includes Gonzaga, Kansas, and then a bunch of mid-major schools. And I don't want to sound derisive about the mid-major schools. Most of them are A10 schools. The A10 is a highly competitive conference. George Washington was very good last year. Temple has a rich basketball history. Rhode Island had some success. New Mexico was very good last year. They obviously have a new coach as Richard Pitino moves on to Xavier to coach in the same conference as his dad, Rick Pitino, which should be very fun. UNLV has a new coach as well, and Josh Pastner, former Georgia Tech head coach. But it's still kind of odd to see Kansas basically be the standout, and then Gonzaga, and then a bunch of schools that aren't even in the power conference level. It's just unique to see that list. Does that mean that Bill Self and Mark Few know something that other coaches don't? Does that mean they're more desperate? Does it not mean anything and we're reading way too far into it? Maybe. All of those things could be true in some capacity. I just thought it was a unique list to see. The fit for Brady at Gonzaga is fairly clear because we've talked about it with Brendan Howson. We've talked about it to an extent with Daniel Skillings. We've talked about it with Isaiah Pasha or Bryce Lindsey or any other of these transfer guards that Gonzaga is pursuing, because most of them are between 6'4" and 6'6". Most of them were good three-point shooters. This is what the Zags are pursuing right now in the transfer portal. Rodney Rice is the name I should have mentioned earlier. He listed Gonzaga in his top 6 and has a Zoom call with them, or had a Zoom call with them on Thursday. 6'4" guard who shoots the three ball well. Same with Brendan Howson. Same with everybody else on that list, more or less. This is what Gonzaga wants. And it makes sense because Jalen Warley is probably going to start at the 3. He is a great, lengthy, rangy defender who does not score. He's not an offensive player. Emmanuel Innocente is probably your penciled-in starter at the 2 right now, but I don't think Gonzaga wants him to start. I think they want him to play a role coming off the bench because he's too similar to Jalen Warley. Braden Smith is your starter at the 1. He's a decent shooter, but he's more of a facilitator. So you need a 2, you need a shooting guard who can shoot, who can score from the outside, who can space the floor, because you're losing that with Nolan Hickman's departure. And you just need some offensive thump, because neither Smith or Warley or Innocente are big-time scorers. You can't be too reliant on Braden Huff and Graham Ike to do all of your scoring. That's just too much pressure on those guys. So you need more scoring punch from the backcourt. Brady provides that. 13.5 points per game in the Missouri Valley Conference, 38% from 3, over 4 attempts per game. Gonzaga lost 87% of their three-point shooting from last year. Between Hickman, Nemhard, Battle, and Greg all graduating, between Dusty Stromer and Michael Ajayi hitting the portal, 87% of their made threes from last year's team, which was a bad three-point shooting team, are all gone. They need to replenish the outside depth bad. Seal Venters obviously is in this conversation, health permitting. That's a big part of this, but Gonzaga is clearly looking at adding to that room, to the guard room, to the three-point shooting space, whether or not Venters is healthy, and they should be. He can't be the only solid three-point shooter on the roster either. So a player like Vincent Brady, while not being pursued by a ton of other super high-profile programs, is the kind of player that totally makes sense for Mark Few and the Zags on this 2025-26 roster. Well, folks, 9 WCC players have already transferred to Power 5 programs this offseason, 9 of them. Meanwhile, there's only been 1 Power 5 player who's transferred to a school in the WCC. In fact, there's only been 3 total transfers into the WCC this offseason. We're going to talk about what's happened so far in the WCC offseason coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're moving away from talking about specific transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs to instead just take a look around the WCC. And we'll do more off-season coverage of this conference as Gonzaga enters their final year of the WCC this upcoming season, which is wild to say and wild to think about and wild to talk about. But since it is still the WCC for Gonzaga, let's talk about the players that have moved out the door, players coming in the door again. Well, I'm sure we'll have our good friend Zach Farmer host the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We'll have him on to talk about what's going on in the conference. We'll continue to keep you up to date on it. But right now, as I record this in the evening on April 10th, we've already seen quite a few very talented players from this conference not only enter the transfer portal, but already commit to new homes, while we've seen some players who've entered the transfer portal who have yet to commit. And then we've seen a few, not very many, but a few players come back into the conference. That number will certainly tick up. I think the main thing that I at least took away from this is that the high major programs, the best of the best, the big money programs, they're basically taking their pick of the litter in the transfer portal right now. And then the smaller guys will get their pick later when everything's been picked through and cleaned up. This isn't exactly revolutionary. This is not some like unearthed scalding hot take or anything like that, but it's very pronounced how it has happened this year. And I think part of that is the shortened transfer portal window, the influx of NIL money that schools are willing to spend right now with the emphasis on it. I just think there's a lot of factors that have kind of culminated in players quickly committing to Power 5 programs, while as the mid-major programs are not having that same level of immediate success in terms of building a roster. Here are the 9 players, and there's 8 of them plus Michael Ajayi, who committed to Butler. So we'll just say that right now. Here are the 8 other players who have transferred from a WCC program to a Power 5 program. First, you have Mo Odom, who was a star in the WCC tournament this past season for Pepperdine. He's going to Arizona State for his final season of eligibility. Christoph Tilley, one of 2 players from Santa Clara to hit the portal and land at a Power 5 program. Tilley is going to Ohio State. That's a big move for him, coming off of a very successful season in the WCC. Michael Ratai from Oregon State, 2 Oregon State players who have committed in the portal, one who is close to committing as I'm recording this. Michael Ratai, who was tremendous. I thought he should have gone to the NBA draft. I think maybe he still will. I don't know, but he's going to Baylor. That's a great fit. Baylor was desperate for a power forward last year. Mikey Ratai is probably the best one they could have found in the portal. What a great get for Scott Drew and the Bears. Nate Kings, who was also a fantastic player for Oregon State this past year. He's going all the way across the country to go play for Red Autry and the Orange of Syracuse. Javon Porter, very unsurprising move here. He goes from LMU to Missouri. I think he's the 5th member of the Porter family to play at Missouri, so not exactly a shock there, coming off a strong season for LMU. Tyree Bryan, this one just happened a few hours ago as I'm recording on Thursday evening, from Santa Clara, the guy who dropped 35 on the Zags in that home game against the Broncos that they lost. He's transferring to Texas Tech to replace Chance McMillian, who was the Grand Canyon transfer, who was a great three-point shooter for the Red Raiders. That's a huge get for Texas Tech as well. And then a pair of Portland Pilots. Portland, this was not a great Portland team this last year. They really weren't, but yet 2 of their players are ending up in the SEC and the Big Ten, which seems insane to say out loud, but here we are. Max McKinnon, who had a 43-point game in conference play, was definitely Portland's best player. He's going to LSU to join the Tigers in the SEC. Meanwhile, Austin Rapp, their Australian big man who hit 95 threes last year, was the leader in the WCC in three-pointers, and I believe was the 3rd most three-pointers made by a freshman in all of college basketball last year. So I get the appeal. He's 6'10", and he made a bunch of threes last year. He ends up at Wisconsin. He had a top 5 that had Clemson and Iowa and Wisconsin and a couple other significant programs. I think they were all Big Ten schools except Clemson. Now he ends up at Wisconsin, a program that loves their stretch bigs. So be interested to see how he's able to play at that level. That's a big jump for both Rapp and McKinnon. So those are your 9, again, including Ajayi Butler. Those are your 9 guys transferring to power conference programs so far in the WCC. There's only 3 players who've transferred into the WCC. 2 of them are going to San Francisco. One of them is David Fuchs from Rhode Island, so coming from the A10 to the WCC. The other one is Mookie Cook. That name sounds familiar. Gonzaga recruited Mookie Cook out of high school. He was a McDonald's All-American. He played LeBron James in a movie at one point, and then he went to Oregon, was injured for his entire freshman year, barely got off the bench his sophomore year, hit the portal. Now he goes to San Francisco. I'm really interested what Mookie Cook, 6'8", super high-level athlete, what he's capable of doing for Chris Gerlofson's offense. They lose Malik Thomas. We'll talk about him in a second. Marcus Williams graduates, but they do keep Tyrone Riley, their star freshman last year, who entered the portal and then decided to come back despite getting attention from Kentucky, among many other programs. So Tyrone Riley and Mookie Cook's going to make for a heck of a wing rotation for Chris Gerlofson and the Dons. The other one is Mike Saunders Jr. transferring from McNeese to Pepperdine. Obviously, there are going to be tons more players who transfer into the WCC as the offseason goes on. But for right now, it's notable that there's only 3 when there are 9 who have transferred out of the conference specifically to power conference programs. There are many others who are currently in the transfer portal who are uncommitted, and we're going to go through them here somewhat quickly. This is just the list. I think there was 48 total players, according to evanmiyakawa.com, who has a transfer portal database that's very detailed, that does a great job of keeping up with his stats and his kind of evaluations of these players. And it's updated every single day. So it's a huge resource for me personally. But these are the players that are in the top 500 at evanmiya.com who are in the transfer portal and yet to commit from the WCC. Number 1 is Malik Thomas. Not a surprise, led the conference in scoring. He's going to get a big old bag of money from somebody, and very justifiably, he's a fantastic player. Lawan Watts from Washington State is also in the transfer portal. There's been a little bit of buzz about him to Gonzaga, I think in part because of just the locality of it. I'll also mention Cedric Coward is in the transfer portal. We're going to talk more about Cedric Coward next week. Don't worry. We're going to talk about Cedric Coward. But Lawan Watts also in the transfer portal. DeMarco Minor from Oregon State, who it was revealed on Thursday has a top 3 of Pitt, Virginia Tech, and Florida State. So it sounds like DeMarco Minor, who they call Polo, is going to be at the power level as well, in the ACC more specifically, although he has not officially committed yet. Nate Kalmise from Washington State, their starting point guard, is in the transfer portal. Lateris Lilivicic, oh man, I tried, I practiced, and I still am not going to get that name right. Apologies. From Oregon State, he's in the transfer portal. Isaiah Watts, another player from from Washington State, in the transfer portal. Elijah Fisher, who had a great season for Dave Smart in the Pacific Tigers, he's in the transfer portal. There's a lot of other players from Pacific in the portal, but most of them, as you might have guessed, did not make the top 500 on Evan's list. Parsifala, starting center for Oregon State, who had a pretty good game against the Zags when the Beavers hosted them in Corvallis. He's in the transfer portal. Vukasin Masic, who is, I think, the third best player for UP this year behind Rapp and McKinnon. He's in the portal. Santiago Truett from San Diego. Jason Rivera Torres, who's the backup guard for San Francisco. And then Ashton Hardaway, the only player from St. Mary's in the transfer portal. Penny Hardaway's son, who spent 2 years at Memphis, transferred to St. Mary's, played every single game, or almost every game for St. Mary's, but was not really in the rotation. Now he hits the portal looking for his third home in college basketball. Like I said, we'll have more. We'll do team breakdowns when we get into the doldrums, the August and Septembers. We'll take a closer look at how these rosters have shaken out, what it means for Gonzaga's competition in the WCC, all that. But the early returns right now are a whole heck of a lot of very talented players in this conference heading off to the Big Ten, to the SEC, to the Big 12, whereas a lot of talent coming back just hasn't really happened yet. It will, but it hasn't happened yet. That's going to wrap it up for me today and for this week here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Got to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners as well. We'll be back on Monday, continuing to talk transfer portal, continuing our season in review series, talking about every player on the roster and getting you kind of a recap of their season and talking about their future, if it is in Spokane or not. So all that coming your way next week, along with more transfer portal coverage. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. And as always, go Zags.